Welcome back to the deep dive. If you ever loved a book so much that you felt the author, well, owed you a second one or a third or even a 10th, then today's subject is definitely for you.
Uh-huh.
We are peering through the slats of the shutters in Monroeville, Alabama, to try and understand one of the most famous and yet most fiercely private American writers, Nelle Harper Lee.
Her career is just, it's less a standard timeline and more of a brilliant, isolated anomaly. I mean, Harper Lee is defined entirely by the monumental, almost unparalleled success of a single book, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Right.
So you're looking at a 60-year professional timeline that's essentially bracketed by one masterpiece, decades of intense silence, and then these two highly controversial decades-later publications that just shattered the myth of her one-hit wonder status.
That is precisely the mission today. We want to look beyond the iconic status of Scout and Atticus Finch and beyond the Pulitzer Prize and the 40 million copies sold, and really examine the complex reality of a writer whose most defining act for most of her life was silence.
A very intentional, very resolute choice of silence.
Exactly.
Nelle Harper Lee, who lived from 1926 to 2016, she holds this really conflicted spot in the modern American canon. We all know the defining achievement, To Kill a Mockingbird, 1960.
Wins the Pulitzer for fiction in '61, immediately becomes required reading in every high school.
And yeah, a textbook example of social literature. But her story is so compelling because that one single book is now framed by two extremely contentious publications.
Released very late in her life or even after her death, that completely challenge our understanding of her intent and of her characters.
So first you have the earlier draft, Go Set a Watchman, which hits shelves in 2015, and it was marketed, really sensationally as a sequel.
Right, a sequel that generated massive controversy. I mean, it offered a dramatically different and, frankly, a far less comfortable perspective on our most beloved characters.
And then looking ahead, her story still isn't finished. We're anticipating a posthumous collection called The Land of Sweet Forever, due out on October 21st, 2025.
So this deep dive is really about investigating those unusual, sometimes painful dynamics between an artist who just wanted privacy,
The singular work that made her a global icon,
and the massive, almost unavoidable weight of public expectation that, followed her right to the grave.
Yeah, the central conflict here, for you the learner, is really this tension between authorial control and public ownership. So let's start at the beginning.
Okay, let's unpack this and start at the roots, because you cannot truly understand the moral landscape of To Kill a Mockingbird without understanding the soil it grew from, her deep Alabama background.
Absolutely. Nelle Harper Lee was born on April 28, 1926, the youngest of 4 children, in Monroeville, Alabama. And the town of Maycomb, the setting of the novel, is an almost literal mirror of her hometown.
Oh, completely. The courthouse square, the tight-knit but, let's say, gossip-prone community.
And the rigid social structures of the Deep South, it's all there.
And even her name tells a story, doesn't it? It's a story of precision and identity management, which is so crucial given her later struggles with fame.
How so?
Well, she used Nell personally. That was her grandmother's name, Ellen, but spelled backwards. But she chose Harper Lee as her professional pen name.
And that was a deliberate choice.
A very deliberate choice, specifically to prevent her first name, Nell, from being misidentified by, say, northern readers or journalists as Nellie.
That's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about her concern for accuracy and control, even that early on.
It really does.
It shows that even before success, she was meticulous about how she was perceived. And her full name, Nelle Harper, it carried significant family weight. Her middle name, Harper, honored Dr. William W. Harper, a local pediatrician from Selma.
The doctor who saved her older sister Louise's life.
Exactly. These deep Southern family connections, these personal debts, they're just woven into the fabric of her earliest work.
And while, we can note the more distant legacy, she was related to Confederate General Robert E. Lee, the immediate and crucial influence came from her father.
Amasa Coleman Lee, we have to spend some time on him.
We absolutely do. He was the foundational influence for Atticus Finch, the moral center of her entire universe.
He was a successful lawyer, a former newspaper editor, and a businessman who served in the Alabama state legislature for 12 years, right? From 1926 to 38.
Which gives him that political and social standing, to be the conscience of a place like Maycomb.
But the most crucial detail of his career, the one that provides the immediate context for the moral core of Mockingbird, is his defense work.
Right. Before he settled into his practice as a title lawyer, which was the safer, quieter kind of law, Amasa Coleman Lee took on the defense of two black men accused of murdering a white storekeeper.
And the tragic, real-life conclusion of that defense is just a stark piece of context for the fictional trial of Tom Robinson.
Because despite his best efforts,
Both of his clients were convicted and ultimately hanged.
that real-world outcome, a lawyer upholding a moral code only to be crushed by societal irrationality and racial prejudice, I mean, that must have profoundly impacted Lee.
Oh, of course. It set the stage for the moral weight and the social consciousness that just permeates her novel.
She transformed her father's professional history into a quest for fictional justice, even if it was unobtainable in the real world.
It creates such a potent psychological dynamic, doesn't it? The novel becomes a way to revisit and maybe rewrite that devastating failure.
Giving Atticus Finch, the fictionalized version of her father, a moment of, transcendent moral victory, even in losing the case.
Which in the book is a symbolic stand. It's a public display of righteousness.
So, shifting a bit to the seeds of fiction in her childhood, the dynamics of her family life were also really formative. She was a known tomboy, a bit of an outsider.
And her most profound bond was with a summer visitor who would later become a literary legend in his own right.
Truman Capote.
Yes, Capote. He was a couple of years older, and he would visit relatives who lived next door to the Lees in Monroeville.
And they were just inseparable, weren't they? A perfect pairing of the tomboy and the sensitive, often fragile future writer.
This connection is absolutely essential. It not only gave us the character of Dill Harris, but it gave Capote one of his only stable childhood relationships.
A bond based on imagination, storytelling, and just observing the very strange world of the adults around them.
But before that could really flower into literary fame, Lee had to reject the path that was sort of laid out for her.
The legal path.
The legal path. She developed an interest in English lit in high school, and she even went to law school at the University of Alabama, trying to follow in her father's footsteps.
And she seemed to embrace college life at first. She wrote for the university newspaper, The Crimson White, and for the humor magazine, Rammer Jammer.
It clearly showed her talent for observation and for finding a narrative voice.
But the actual practice of law, the drudgery of it all, it just didn't hold her.
No. She left the University of Alabama one semester short of completing her law degree, and the sources describe this as causing great disappointment to her father.
Which brings us back to Atticus Finch. I wonder if that disappointment solidified her determination to create this idealized version of her father's profession in fiction, precisely because she couldn't tolerate the real-world practice of it.
That's a fascinating thought. It's highly likely. The character of Atticus is arguably a kind of peace offering to her father's memory and the tradition he represented.
A profession she respected intellectually, but just couldn't commit to emotionally.
Exactly. Her direction was clear, especially after her father financed one last attempt to pull her back, a summer program at Oxford in 1948.
And that only solidified her desire to write fiction. The stage was now set for her masterpiece.
It was. She had the deep Southern roots, the moral dilemma from the legal world, the intense experience of childhood, and, the rejection of a traditional path. All the ingredients were there.
Which brings us to the making of that masterpiece, the genesis of To Kill a Mockingbird. In 1949, Lee makes the commitment. She moves to New York City.
And she takes survival jobs, first at a bookstore, then as an airline reservation agent, just writing in her spare time, trying to find her voice.
This period, the mid-1950s, was the true crucible. She found an agent who believed in her, Maurice Crane, and she connected with key friends in the city.
Michael and Joy Brown and their family.
And this is where that pivotal moment, the stuff of literary legend, happens. We often talk about the lonely slog of writing, but for Lee, the breakthrough came in a moment of radical, almost altruistic support.
Yes. December 1956. At the Browns' townhouse, they give her a Christmas gift that completely changed her trajectory.
It was a year's worth of her airline wages, with a simple note.
A note that said, "You have 1 year off from your job to write whatever you please. Merry Christmas."
Can you imagine the emotional weight of that? I mean, it wasn't just money, it was radical belief, it was permission.
And the financial freedom to dedicate herself fully to the craft, validating her decision to leave both law school and her home state.
That financial freedom meant she could finally submit her manuscript. She titled it Go Set a Watchman, and she submitted it to her publisher J.B. Lippincott Company in the spring of 1957. She was 31 years old.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This is where the story of Mockingbird transforms from a lone genius narrative into a profound testament to the power of editing.
The manuscript lands on the desk of editor Tay Hohoff.
And Hohoff immediately recognizes the raw talent. She saw the spark of the true writer that flashed in every line. But critically, she found the manuscript itself to be, well, highly problematic.
She said it was more a series of anecdotes than a fully conceived novel.
Exactly. The story lacked focus, it lacked structure, it just wandered between different characters and time periods.
So Lee spent the next couple of years, nearly 3 years in total, working very closely with Hohoff. She was receptive to the guidance.
She later said, I was a first-time writer, so I did as I was told, but I think that phrase really minimizes the intense, grueling process of revision they went through.
It does. Hohoff's approach wasn't to dictate, it was to guide. She talked about their intense, sometimes hours-long discussions when Lee disagreed with a suggestion.
And Hohoff's description captures it perfectly. She said sometimes Lee came around to her way of thinking, sometimes she came around to Lee's, and sometimes the discussion would open up an entirely new line of country.
So this wasn't passive acceptance. It was a deeply collaborative intellectual struggle to find the true story that was buried inside all that raw material.
And the main focus Hohoff encouraged was shifting the narrative from the adult scout returning home, which was the original structure of Go Set a Watchman,
to the young scout observing her childhood, which gives the story its innocence and its moral punch.
That single editorial decision saved the novel.
It did. And that leads to the famous anecdote about the pressure she was under. A biographer, Charles J. Shields, he recounts that one winter night, Lee became so frustrated, so convinced she just didn't have the talent to reshape the manuscript,
that she threw the entire pile of pages out her window right into the snow.
And her editor's response was legendary. A true example of tough love.
Hohoff just told her to march outside immediately and pick up the pages.
That moment of intervention didn't just save the manuscript. It confirmed the editor's unwavering belief in the author's potential. So Lee salvaged the pages, she committed to the final round of revisions, and the book was transformed.
The genius of that final novel, Tika M., lay in how clearly it mirrored her autobiographical reality, but distilled it through the lens of childhood innocence.
Scout, the tomboy narrator, is the daughter of a respected small-town Alabama attorney. It's a direct reflection of Lee's own relationship with her father.
And the character of Dill Harris was, of course, a transparent homage to Truman Capote. Capote himself confirmed that even specific details about Boo Radley, the man down the road who left things in the trees, were absolutely true.
Right. The difference, as Capote noted, was that he took those details and sort of spun them into a gothic dream in his own work, while Lee presented them with this unflinching direct realism.
And the novel's foundational themes, the racist attitudes, the irrationality of adults toward race and class, were all informed by significant real-world events.
Her father's defense work is the obvious one, but we also have to acknowledge the Scottsboro Boys case from 1931.
Oh, definitely. That case, with 9 young black men falsely accused of assaulting 2 white women, became this huge international legal drama.
And it happened when Lee was a child. The widespread miscarriage of justice, the prejudice, the political uproar that undoubtedly shapes the legal environment she built for Tom Robinson's trial.
So the book was finally published on July 11th, 1960. The success was immediate and just staggering.
It's still a bestseller, over 40 million copies sold. It was voted Best Novel of the Century in a 1999 Library Journal poll.
And the acclaim was precisely what Lee both desperately hoped for and at the same time immediately feared.
She captured that duality perfectly. She said she had hoped only for a quick and merciful death at the hands of the reviewers, but instead she got rather a whole lot, and in some ways this was just about as frightening.
And that quote just sets the stage for the rest of her life, doesn't it? The price of fame.
It really does. The intense whirlwind of publicity that followed Mockingbird was immediately difficult for her. Lee was intensely private, an introvert.
And this created a sharp, almost irreconcilable contrast with the decadent, attention-seeking lifestyle of her childhood friend, Truman Capote.
It's fascinating how their paths diverged so radically right at the height of their success. The Capote connection was still active in 1959.
She was living near him in Manhattan part-time, and of course she went with him to Holcomb, Kansas, to help research In Cold Blood.
Her contribution there was substantial. Some say her empathy and social skills were essential to getting details from the traumatized townspeople.
But this period also marked the beginning of the end for their friendship.
A sad irony, isn't it? Their friendship just didn't survive her success.
No. It suffered and eventually petered out because Capote, who was notoriously competitive, had immense difficulties coping with the worldwide acclaim of Mockingbird. Her success overshadowed his, and the jealousy just strained their bond past the breaking point.
And with Mockingbird conquering the world, the pressure for a follow-up was immense.
She worked on 2 subsequent novels, The Long Goodbye and one about a serial murderer called The Reverend, but she filed them both away unfinished.
She was fiercely self-critical, and nothing she wrote could meet the impossible standards set by her debut.
And this marked the start of the literary silence that lasted for over 5 decades. And it wasn't writer's block, it was a conscious, definitive choice.
Which she articulated very clearly later in life.
She gave the definitive reason for that silence in a 2011 interview. She said there were 2 clear reasons. 1, I wouldn't go through the pressure and publicity I went through with to kill a mockingbird for any amount of money.
And the second reason, which is maybe the most profound statement any writer can make.
Second, I have said what I wanted to say, and I will not say it again.
That's a powerful declaration of artistic closure. She felt she'd addressed her core themes, and any further attempt would just be repetition.
And while she remained silent as a creator, she became one of the fiercest advocates for her existing text. In 1966, amid heightened racial tensions,
The era of freedom riders and sit-ins,
To Kill a Mockingbird became controversial, ironically, among segregationists.
which led to one of her most memorable public interventions. A Richmond, Virginia school board tried to ban the book as immoral literature.
And Lane didn't just issue a polite statement. She wrote this scathing intellectual letter to the editor. She didn't argue on free speech grounds. She turned the moral tables completely.
She argued that the book spells out in words of seldom more than 2 syllables a code of honor and conduct, Christian in its ethic, that is the heritage of all Southerners.
But she saved her best shot for the end, linking the board's actions to Orwell's idea of doublethink. She called the ban a better example of doublethink than she had expected before 1984.
It was a perfect, devastating literary burn, and the controversy backfired, thanks in part to an editor who started a fund to give free copies to kids.
The Beetle Bumble Fund. They gave away 81 copies in the first week.
It just shows she was private, but not passive. She fiercely protected her creation.
And beyond the controversies, she was rightly showered with recognition. She was deeply involved in the 1962 film adaptation.
Which she called one of the best translations of a book to film ever made.
And she had a profound, lasting friendship with Gregory Peck, who played Atticus. His grandson is even named Harper Peck Vole in her honor.
She received major civilian accolades. The Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2007, the National Medal of Arts in 2010.
But she never, ever wavered in her commitment to silence. At an induction ceremony in 2007, when they invited her to speak, she just said, well, it's better to be silent than to be a fool.
In her later years, her challenges became intensely personal and legal. By 2011, she was in an assisted living facility, using a wheelchair, partially blind and deaf, and suffering from memory loss.
And this physical and cognitive decline, unfortunately, it made her vulnerable. It opened the door for legal battles over her assets and her legacy.
In 2013, she filed a lawsuit to regain the copyright for Mockingbird from a son-in-law of her former agent. She claimed she'd been duped in 2007 when her senses were in decline.
That lawsuit was settled, but it shows her ferocious, enduring dedication to controlling her work, even as her physical capacity was fading.
She even sued the Monroe County Heritage Museum in 2014 for using her name and title to sell souvenirs without her consent.
This fierce independence and dedication to control sets a very uneasy, very contentious context for the sudden controversial appearance of her second novel.
Okay, this is perhaps the most difficult part of her legacy. So what does this all mean for the history of American publishing, the discovery of Go Set a Watchman?
One of the most ethically fraught events in modern literary history. The official story is that the manuscript was found in Lee's safe deposit box in 2014 by her lawyer, Tanja Carter.
After an initial asset appraisal back in 2011 supposedly failed to find it.
Right. Carter claims she re-examined the box in 2014 and just stumbled upon it. HarperCollins announced the publication in February 2015, saying it was thought to be lost.
Lee's agent even claimed that Mockingbird was originally meant to be the first book of a trilogy, with Watchman as the final piece.
Which created immediate excitement and massive pre-orders. But we have to stop here and engage in some critical thinking. Was it a sequel? Or just the first draft of Mockingbird?
And the evidence overwhelmingly favors the latter.
The narrative shift is what made it so compelling and so disturbing. GSW is set 20 years after TKM, with an adult scout returning to Maycomb.
And the shock was the profound betrayal of the Atticus Finch ideal. Michiko Kakutani of the New York Times called it disturbing reading.
Because Atticus, the moral paragon of Mockingbird, is depicted as racist. He attends a white citizens' council meeting, he opposes desegregation.
It's just incompatible with the father we grew up idolizing. And that whole trilogy assertion was rapidly and powerfully refuted by critics and researchers.
They argued that GSW was only the first draft submitted to Tay Hohoff in the 1950s, the one she correctly identified as anecdotal and unfocused.
And they confirmed this not just through historical context, but by textual comparison. Many passages exist word for word in both books.
It confirmed a linear, one-to-one revision process. Not a sequel, not a final installment, yet it was marketed and sold as a sequel.
Despite having what they called many narrative incongruities.
Exactly. These are typical signs of a writer figuring things out in an early draft. But when you publish it as a sequel, those discrepancies become major plot holes.
And this is where the ethical firestorm truly erupted. Given Lee's long silence, her stated desire for privacy, and her documented cognitive decline.
Immediate and widespread concerns arose that she was coerced into publishing a book she never intended the world to see.
Especially one that damaged the legacy of her most beloved character.
The controversy was so intense that the state of Alabama's Department of Human Resources launched an investigation
into whether she was competent enough to consent to the publishing contract. That almost never happens in the literary world.
Officially, the investigation found the claims of coercion and elder abuse to be unfounded. Tanja Carter, her lawyer, said Lee was happy as hell with the publication.
But there were contesting voices, loud ones.
Persistent ones. Marja Mills, Lee's friend and biographer, along with NYT columnist Joe Nocera, they strongly questioned this whole narrative of a happy discovery.
Mills pointed out the incredibly convenient timing.
Yes. The book was announced just 2.5 months after the death of Lee's older sister, Alice.
Alice Lee, who lived to be 103, had been Nell's gatekeeper, advisor, protector her entire adult life.
Mills quoted Alice as having said, "Poor Nelle Harper can't see and can't hear and will sign anything put before her by anyone in whom she has confidence."
So Alice's death removed the last, most powerful barrier between Harper Lee and those who wished to profit from her work.
And Nocera's critique was even more pointed. He claimed Carter knew about the manuscript as early as 2011 and just waited until Alice, the protector, was gone.
He argued Carter basically positioned herself as Lee's new custodian lawyer, trustee, spokesperson, waiting for the precise moment when the frail author could no longer truly resist.
The entire controversy is a textbook example of the struggle for control over the legacy of an iconic but highly vulnerable figure.
Which is where objective input became necessary, leading us to forensic science and stylometry.
Right. Stylometric analysis is essentially digital forensics for literature. It measures an author's unique linguistic fingerprint.
And a major study was done, contrasting the fingerprints of Lee, her editor Hohoff, and Truman Capote across the texts.
The primary finding confirmed that TKM and GSW were indisputably written by the same person, Harper Lee. It settled the ghostwriter question.
But the analysis contained a fascinating wrinkle about the creative origins.
It did. By comparing Capote's fingerprint to different sectors of Mockingbird, the analysis suggested that Capote could have helped her write, or at least heavily polished, the opening chapters.
That detail adds another layer of complexity. The friendship may have ended in professional jealousy, but the technical analysis suggests a brief moment of artistic collaboration.
This whole saga, this intense scrutiny of her life, her work, her competency, it led right up to the end of her days. Harper Lee died peacefully in her sleep on February 19, 2016, aged 89.
But even her death didn't stop the public scrutiny. The New York Times successfully sued for the unsealing of her will in 2018.
And the will revealed that most of her assets were bequeathed to a trust she had formed back in 2011.
The literary world, however, is far from done with Harper Lee. We have a confirmed next release, The Land of Sweet Forever, scheduled for October 21, 2025.
This collection is highly anticipated. It'll have 8 newly discovered early short stories, giving us a window into her development.
And 8 previously published essays and magazine pieces, including works she wrote for Vogue and McCall's.
This collection ensures her canon will continue to expand. The irony is that the woman who said she wouldn't say it again is, years after her death, still speaking through these newly materialized pages.
And her image, of course, remains fixed in pop culture. She's been portrayed in film, multiple times.
By Catherine Keener, who got an Oscar nomination for Capote, and by Sandra Bullock in Infamous.
And tying it all back, her childhood self was actually immortalized in Capote's own fiction before Mockingbird even existed. The character of Idabel Tompkins in Other Voices, Other Rooms.
Inspired by his memories of the young, fierce tomboy Nelle Lee.
So we come back to the central paradox. Harper Lee spent 55 years actively avoiding the spotlight, making her definitive statement. She would not say it again.
She guarded her copyright, she sued to protect her name, she maintained a rigorous personal silence.
Yet given the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the discovery and marketing of her later works, the conflicting accounts of her competency, the timing of her sister's death, the repackaging of a first draft as a sequel, we're left with a fundamental, uncomfortable question.
One that applies to every major figure in the digital age.
So what is that final provocative thought for our learner, the person who has followed this story of fame, silence, and betrayal?
Well, if even an author as fiercely dedicated to anonymity as Harper Lee could not manage to control her own narrative and legacy, if her earliest draft could be dragged out and marketed against her definitive artistic preference, is it truly possible for any author to ever close the chapter on their own work?
When does the material cease being the author's and become public property?
Exactly. And the controversy surrounding Ghosts at a Watchman raises the stakes dramatically. What is the moral obligation of those who become the custodians of an icon's unpublished work, especially when that icon can no longer give meaningful consent? That is a debate that transcends literature. It is a question of human ethics, control, and the enduring power of myth over reality.